A rugged mountain range stretches out before a determined woman, walking towards an old, weathered barn. Her dog follows at her heels, and she's about to step into what she believes is simply a forgotten piece of history. But when she opens the barn door, the light hits something far more valuable than she ever expected. A discovery that could change her life forever. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you're drawn to stories like this, full of mystery and unexpected twists, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode will leave you on the edge of your seat. Let's get started. The sun began to dip behind the rugged mountain peaks, casting long golden shadows across the field. Elizabeth Green's boots crunched against the dry, uneven path, the sound almost rhythmic in the silence of the wilderness. Her golden retriever, Scout, trotted at her side, his tail swishing back and forth as they neared the barn. Elizabeth had moved to Ballenside, this remote corner of the world, to escape the demands of city life, seeking peace and quiet on the land she had recently purchased. Yet, despite the charm of the surrounding landscape, the barn on the property had always seemed like nothing more than an old relic, something to be ignored until it inevitably fell apart. But today, something drew her to it. She had explored every corner of her new home, save for the barn. Its worn wooden exterior, faded red with streaks of rust on the roof, stood stubbornly at the edge of the field, surrounded by overgrown grass and wildflowers. She had seen it from a distance so many times, but now, standing at its entrance, she felt the stirrings of curiosity she hadn't expected. Scout's ears perked as he padded forward, his nose twitching at the unfamiliar smells in the air. Elizabeth paused before the barn's old rusted door. The handle was cold under her fingers, the barn's ancient frame creaking as if it were about to speak. She had no real reason to investigate it, but an inexplicable feeling tugged at her gut. Perhaps, after all, this barn held more than just dust and forgotten memories. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a loud squeal. A rush of cool, musty air greeted her, mixing with the earthy scent of decaying wood. Scout bounded in ahead of her, sniffing eagerly at the ground, as Elizabeth stepped cautiously inside. The barn was much larger than she'd imagined from the outside, its shadowy interior filled with forgotten relics of a past she had no connection to. Wooden beams stretched overhead, and the floor was littered with old farming tools, crates, and piles of broken furniture. The light filtered through small cracks in the barn's roof, casting beams of sunlight that danced across the dusty air. Elizabeth's eyes drifted over the scene, but then something caught her attention. A faint glimmer of something shiny peeked from behind a stack of boxes in the tool far corner. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but her feet moved before she had time to think about it. Slowly, she walked toward the source of the gleam, her hand brushing across the rough wooden walls as she passed. There, half hidden behind a pile of discarded crates and old tools, sat a small, ancient-looking chest. Its surface was scratched and covered in grime, but the delicate metalwork on the corners still caught the light, almost as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. She had no idea what was inside, but she could feel the weight of anticipation building within her. A treasure? A forgotten heirloom? The possibilities seemed endless. She knelt beside the chest, brushing away the debris that obscured it. The chest was locked, its metal clasp covered in rust. Elizabeth's fingers trembled slightly as she searched the barn for anything that might help her open it. Then, as if in answer to her silent plea, her eyes landed on a small, metal box on a nearby shelf. She walked over and opened it, revealing a collection of old, rusty tools. One in particular caught her eye. A small, delicate key, its intricate design unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat. It had to be the key. Without thinking, she returned to the chest, slid the key into the lock, and turned it. The lock clicked open with a satisfying sound, the lid creaking as she slowly lifted it. Inside, nestled among layers of fabric, were several small boxes, each filled with various trinkets and artifacts. The first box she pulled out contained what looked like a collection of finely crafted jewelry pieces that appeared ancient, their surfaces tarnished with age. There were no tags, no markings, just intricately designed necklaces, rings, and brooches that seemed to whisper of a past long forgotten. But it wasn't just the jewelry that caught her attention, it was the strange symbols etched into each piece. Symbols she didn't recognize, but felt drawn to, as though they held a significance she couldn't yet understand. Her heart raced. She had no idea what she had just uncovered, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something far more important than she could have imagined. This was no ordinary discovery. This was a mystery waiting to be solved. The afternoon sun was beginning to fade, casting a warm, golden glow over the barn as Elizabeth stood frozen, staring down at the contents of the chest. Each piece inside seemed to pulse with a silent energy, the ancient jewelry shimmering under the dim light. Elizabeth's mind raced, but her body stayed still. She hadn't expected anything like this, not on her quiet piece of land, miles away from the world she once knew. What was all this? And why was it hidden here, in this forgotten barn? The wind outside picked up, sending a soft howl through the barn's creaky walls. Elizabeth gently placed the box back inside the chest, her fingers lingering on the edge of the delicate metalwork. She sat back on her heels, still overwhelmed by what she had found. Her first instinct was to call someone, to get help, maybe the local historian, or even the authorities. But something told her that this discovery wasn't meant to be shared just yet. Something in her gut told her that this was a puzzle she needed to solve on her own. "Scout, what do you think?" she whispered, turning to look at her dog, who had been sniffing the corners of the barn. The dog looked up, as if sensing the gravity of the moment, and trotted over to her side. Elizabeth ran a hand through his fur and sighed. "We've got a mystery on our hands, buddy." She closed the chest and stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from her jeans. Her mind was already racing through possibilities. Could the items in the chest be valuable? Historical artifacts? Or was this all part of some long-lost treasure, hidden away by someone who didn't want to be found? As the last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon, Elizabeth decided to take a step forward. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew it was the beginning of something bigger than she could have imagined. Her peaceful retreat had just turned into an unexpected adventure. And no matter what lay ahead, she was determined to see it through. Scout padded along beside her as she walked back toward the barn door. With a final glance back at the shadows of the barn, Elizabeth stepped out into the evening air, her heart pounding with anticipation. She wasn't just stepping into the unknown, she was embracing it. The next few days passed in a blur of unease and excitement as Elizabeth tried to make sense of what she had found in the barn. The jewelry, the mysterious symbols, the ancient map, it all seemed like pieces to a puzzle she couldn't yet understand. But every time she looked at the chest and its contents, a sense of hope began to rise within her. It wasn't just a discovery, it was something deeper. Something more personal, as though fate had led her to this exact moment. After much deliberation, Elizabeth decided it was time to take the next step. She had heard whispers in town of a local historian, a man named Henry Thompson, who specialized in the history of the area. Elizabeth didn't know much about him, but if anyone could shed light on the strange symbols and artifacts she had uncovered, it was him. The sun hung low in the sky as Elizabeth drove through the winding mountain roads, the rugged landscape stretching out on either side. Scout sat in the passenger seat, his head hanging out the window, enjoying the fresh air. Elizabeth, however, was lost in thought. Each turn of the wheel felt like she was getting closer to unlocking the mystery, yet every passing mile felt like the weight of uncertainty was pressing heavier on her shoulders. She had no idea what she would find when she met Henry, but one thing was clear: she needed answers. When she arrived at Henry's small, weathered cottage on the outskirts of town, Elizabeth felt a strange sense of calm. The home looked like something out of an old storybook, complete with ivy creeping up the walls and a small garden in the front. She walked up the stone path, Scout by her side, and knocked gently on the door. Moments later, the door opened to reveal an older man with gray hair and spectacles perched on the end of his nose. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Elizabeth, but he smiled warmly. "Ah, you must be Elizabeth Green," he said, his voice smooth with age. "I've heard a bit about you. Please come in." Elizabeth stepped inside, taking in the cluttered but cozy interior. Shelves upon shelves of books lined the walls, and antique artifacts were displayed in glass cabinets. It was clear that Henry Thompson was someone deeply immersed in history. "I've come across something," Elizabeth began, hesitating for a moment before continuing. "Something strange. I need your help to understand it." Henry nodded, his eyes twinkling with interest. "What have you found?" Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out the small box containing the jewelry and map. She placed it on the table in front of him, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. Henry picked up the items one by one, inspecting them carefully. His face remained unreadable as he examined the jewelry, the intricate patterns on the metal, the worn edges of the map. "This," he said quietly after a long pause, "is no ordinary treasure." Elizabeth leaned forward, her heart racing. "What do you mean?" Henry set the jewelry down and pointed to the map. "This is part of a legend, a story that has been passed down for generations in this region. A hidden treasure, buried long ago by an outlaw who sought to keep it from the authorities." Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Could this be the treasure she had been searching for? The one from the map? Henry continued. "The symbols on these pieces are ancient, but they are familiar. They correspond to an old, forgotten civilization, one that predates even the earliest settlers of this land. This map, along with these artifacts, could be the key to uncovering a long-lost secret." A surge of adrenaline shot through Elizabeth. "Where do I begin?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry's eyes met hers, filled with a mixture of caution and curiosity. "You've already taken the first step. Now, it's a matter of following the clues. But be warned, Elizabeth, the path ahead may not be what you expect." The next morning, Elizabeth set out with renewed determination. Armed with the map and a notebook full of notes from her conversation with Henry, she was ready to dive deeper into the mystery that had consumed her since the day she had first opened the chest. Henry had warned her that the journey wouldn't be easy, but her curiosity and something deeper, a sense of fate, pushed her forward. The land surrounding her property was vast, a sprawling wilderness that seemed untouched by time. Elizabeth stood on the edge of the barn, studying the map, her eyes tracing the worn lines that crisscrossed its surface. The map depicted not only the land surrounding her but also strange symbols that seemed to mark key locations, places she had never noticed in all her time there. "Scout, what do you think?" Elizabeth muttered, scanning the terrain in front of her. The dog let out a low bark, his tail wagging, as if agreeing with her sense of adventure. Together, they began to explore the areas marked on the map, with Elizabeth taking careful notes as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. The first location they reached was a small cave, nestled between two towering rocks. It wasn't far from the barn, but the path leading to it was treacherous, overgrown with thick brambles and uneven ground. Elizabeth's heart raced as she approached, her hand gripping the map tightly. The cave entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for her to slip through, but the symbols on the map seemed to indicate that this was a place of significance. Inside, the air was damp, cool against her skin. The sound of dripping water echoed in the distance, and the walls were covered in moss and ancient markings. Elizabeth's flashlight flickered as she carefully stepped forward, Scout by her side. The deeper they went, the more the sense of discovery grew overwhelming. She could feel the weight of history in the air, and something about the silence in the cave made her feel as if she were trespassing in a place that had been untouched for centuries. At the back of the cave, hidden in the shadows, she found what she was searching for: an intricately carved stone, partially buried beneath the dirt. Elizabeth knelt down, her breath catching as she wiped away the soil. The stone was covered in the same symbols that had appeared on the jewelry and the Plaponus map. This was no coincidence. This stone was another clue. With trembling hands, Elizabeth ran her fingers over the carvings, trying to decipher their meaning. As she did, she noticed something strange: a small indentation in the stone, shaped like a keyhole. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be the same key she had found in the barn? Elizabeth glanced around the cave, her mind racing. The stone seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as though it had been waiting for her to find it. And in that moment, she realized that the true journey was just beginning. There was a treasure to be found, but it was more than just gold or jewels. It was a legacy waiting to be uncovered, and Elizabeth was about to become a part of it. Elizabeth sat alone in her cabin later that night, the weight of her discoveries heavy in her chest. The carved stone she had found in the cave, its ancient symbols, almost glowing in the dim light of her flashlight, sat on the table in front of her. Scout lay at her feet, his tail thumping occasionally, but Elizabeth barely noticed. She was too lost in thought, her mind racing with possibilities. She had seen something in the stone, something that hadn't quite clicked yet. The indentation in the shape of a keyhole kept haunting her thoughts. Could it be connected to the key she had found in the barn? The more she thought about it, the more the connection seemed undeniable. But the question remained: what would happen if she used the key to open this stone? What could possibly be hidden inside? Her fingers brushed over the smooth surface of the stone, tracing the patterns carved into it. The symbols seemed to dance under her touch, almost as if they were alive. She had no idea what they meant. But deep inside, a strange certainty was settling over her. There was something more to this, something bigger than she could imagine. And it wasn't just about treasure. This was about a secret, buried for centuries, waiting for the right person to uncover it. The map and the artifacts had all led her to this moment. The symbols, the stone, the key, everything was pointing in one direction. Elizabeth knew she had to follow it. The next morning, she set out again, this time with a plan. She would go back to the cave, back to the stone, and she would try the key. It seemed like a foolish idea, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was the right step. As she packed a small bag with water, a flashlight, and her notebook, she glanced at the key, now sitting in the palm of her hand. It was old, worn, but it felt like it had been waiting for this moment. The trek back to the cave felt different this time. As Elizabeth walked through the overgrown path, the air seemed thicker, heavier, as if the earth itself were holding its breath. Scout was unusually quiet, his ears perked as if he too sensed the shift in the atmosphere. When she reached the cave, the air was cooler, more still than before. Elizabeth hesitated at the entrance, taking a deep breath. Her pulse quickened as she stepped inside, Scout close behind. The stone was still where she had left it, sitting in the same place she had found it. She crouched down, inspecting the indentations once more, her heart beating faster now. With trembling hands, Elizabeth took the key and placed it into the indentation. For a moment, nothing happened. She held her breath, wondering if she had made a mistake. But then, with a soft click, the stone shifted. A hidden compartment, previously unseen, slowly opened, revealing something inside. Elizabeth's breath caught in her throat. Inside the compartment were several rolled-up parchment scrolls, their edges yellowed with age. They looked ancient, fragile, as though they had been hidden away for centuries. She gently pulled them out, one by one, her hands shaking. The first scroll unfurled, revealing intricate drawings and symbols that mirrored the ones on the jewelry and the map. Elizabeth's heart raced as she realized what she was looking at: a blueprint of sorts, detailing the locations of hidden treasures across the region. This was it. The treasure wasn't just a pile of gold and jewels. It was a lost history, waiting to be uncovered. As she scanned the drawings, a sense of awe washed over her. This discovery was more than she had ever hoped for. And yet, as the excitement bubbled up inside her, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. There was something else here, something deeper that she wasn't yet seeing. But for now, all Elizabeth could do was stare at the map before her, knowing her journey was far from over. Elizabeth spent the next few days poring over the scrolls, studying the symbols and maps with increasing fascination. Every clue she found led to more questions, and yet, with each step, the sense that she was on the verge of something extraordinary grew stronger. The blueprints outlined a hidden network of treasures, not just in her immediate area, but all across the mountain range. Some treasures seemed small, valuable artifacts, historical relics, but others were vast, seemingly lost civilizations that had left behind their legacies in the most unexpected places. But something else about the maps unsettled Elizabeth. The treasure wasn't just about what was hidden. The symbols on the scrolls on the artifacts spoke of something far older. There was a story buried beneath the gold, something that hinted at a forgotten history, perhaps even a civilization that had never been documented. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that this wasn't just a hunt for treasure. It was a journey into the past, into a story that had been lost to time. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace, Scout curled up at her feet, Elizabeth reflected on what she had learned. The more she understood, the more she realized the significance of the symbols. The treasure wasn't just wealth. It was a key to understanding the history of this land, to understanding the people who had once lived here. The artifacts, the maps, the stone, everything was connected. But to what end? She had made some progress, but there was still a sense of mystery hanging over her. There was so much she didn't understand, and the deeper she went, the more questions arose. Had others sought out this treasure before her? Was she the first to stumble upon it in centuries? And if so, what would she do with it once she had it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise outside. A rustling in the trees. Scout's ears perked up, his body tensing. Elizabeth's heart skipped a beat. She rose from her chair, the old maps still spread out on the table. She walked to the window and looked outside, but saw nothing in the fading twilight, just the trees swaying in the wind. But then, in the distance, she spotted movement. A figure, cloaked in shadow, standing at the edge of her property. Her heart pounded. Who was that? Had someone been following her? Before she could make a move, the figure disappeared into the trees. Elizabeth stood frozen, her mind racing. There was no doubt in her mind now. She was not alone in this hunt. Someone else was after the treasure. And they would stop at nothing to find it. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling quiet, and Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. She had never felt truly isolated in the mountains before, but now, with the mysterious figure from the edge of her property fresh in her mind, she couldn't escape the growing sense of danger. Scout, usually calm and friendly, had become restless, growling occasionally at shadows that Elizabeth couldn't see. It was as if the land itself had become charged with an unfamiliar energy. Despite the unease settling in her chest, Elizabeth pressed forward. She knew she couldn't let fear stop her. The treasure, the history had to be uncovered, and it was her responsibility to do so. With the scrolls and maps spread out before her, she sat at the table, the light of the evening fire flickering in the background, casting long shadows across the room. The symbols, the drawings, all seemed to speak to her, pulling her deeper into the mystery. The legend Henry had mentioned in passing during their first meeting began to resurface in her thoughts. Elizabeth had only skimmed over his words, but now, as she pored over the contents of the scroll, she found herself unable to ignore the history that was buried beneath her feet. It wasn't just treasure, it was a legacy. The outlaw whose story had been passed down for generations was more than a criminal. He was a key player in a story that had long been buried. The legend spoke of a treasure hoard, a vast collection of ancient artifacts hidden by a notorious outlaw who had once sought refuge in the mountains centuries ago. This outlaw had crossed paths with a forgotten civilization, one that had left behind mysterious artifacts, pieces of their culture, and most importantly, their knowledge of lost technology. The outlaw, driven by greed and desperation, had hidden these riches in a network of caves and secluded locations, using intricate maps and cryptic symbols to protect it from those who might try to steal it. But over time, the knowledge of its existence had faded, lost in the myths and legends of the region. As Elizabeth studied the maps, the more she realized. These weren't just treasure markers, they were symbols of a vast, hidden history. This treasure wasn't only about wealth. It was about rediscovering a lost civilization, unlocking secrets that had been buried for centuries. And Elizabeth, it seemed, was now a part of that story. But there was a dark side to the legend, one that sent a chill down her spine. The outlaw had left more than just treasure behind. According to the legend, he had cursed the land, ensuring that only the worthy could find what was hidden. Those who came seeking the treasure would face trials that would test not just their physical strength, but their morals, their resolve, and their very understanding of what they were truly searching for. Elizabeth couldn't help but wonder. Was she ready for the trials that lay ahead? Elizabeth woke the next morning with a renewed sense of urgency. The revelation from the scrolls had transformed her view of the treasure. It wasn't just something to be discovered, it was something to be understood. But that understanding came with a price, a challenge that she wasn't sure she was ready for. The outlaw's curse still lingered in the back of her mind, a warning she couldn't ignore. Her first step was to head back to the cave. It was the next location marked on the map, and it seemed to hold more significance than the others. She couldn't explain why, but it felt like the cave was the key to everything. The stone, the map, the strange symbols, it was all tied to this place. And there, buried beneath the layers of history, was the truth she needed to uncover. As she made her way up the mountain path, the cool morning air stinging her face, Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that the mountain was watching her. The land, with all its beauty, had an eerie, almost sentient quality. The trees seemed to whisper in the wind, and the rocks, weathered by time, seemed to carry secrets within them. Scout walked ahead, his usual enthusiasm subdued, as if he too understood the weight of the journey they were on. When Elizabeth reached the cave, the entrance loomed before her, dark and foreboding. It was the same cave she had visited days before, but today it felt different, heavier. As she stepped inside, the air seemed thicker, more charged, as if the cave was alive with energy, waiting for her to enter. She could almost hear the whispers of the past echoing against the stone walls, a reminder that she was about to unlock something that had been buried for centuries. Elizabeth lit her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. The familiar stone, the one with the carved symbols, sat in the center of the cave, just as she had left it. She knelt beside it, running her fingers over the markings once more. This time, though, it felt different. The stone seemed to hum with energy beneath her touch, as if responding to her presence. The key she had found in the barn felt warm in her hand, as if it too knew its purpose was at hand. She slid the key into the indentation once again. This time, there was no hesitation. The stone moved, shifting slowly to reveal a hidden compartment beneath it, much larger than before. Inside, Elizabeth found a leather-bound book, its pages old and fragile. Her fingers trembled as she opened it, revealing strange drawings and cryptic text. The book seemed to tell the story of the outlaw, the civilization, and the treasure. But there was more. It contained warnings. Warnings about the trials ahead, and the consequences of seeking the treasure without truly understanding its meaning. Elizabeth closed the book slowly, a sense of foreboding settling over her. The mountain had given up one secret, but now, she realized, she was about to uncover far more. And as the whispers of the past echoed in her mind, she understood one thing. The true treasure wasn't the gold or jewels, it was the knowledge that came with it, and that knowledge could change everything. The days following her discovery in the cave were a blur of emotions for Elizabeth. The leather-bound book, heavy with ancient knowledge, sat on her table, its presence weighing on her more than the physical treasure ever could. The messages within it were clear. There was more to this than a simple hunt for gold or artifacts. The treasure was a puzzle, a mystery, and solving it would not only require courage, but wisdom. Elizabeth's life had already been irrevocably changed by the discovery, but now, with the weight, 12, of history on her shoulders, she felt the true transformation beginning. No longer was she simply a woman searching for quiet solace in the mountains. She had become part of something far larger, a story that spanned centuries, tied to ancient civilizations, forgotten legends, and an outlaw who had hidden knowledge meant for someone like her. Her routine had shifted. The mornings were no longer filled with idle thoughts or peaceful solitude. Instead, she was consumed with studying the book, deciphering the symbols, and cross-referencing them with the maps and scrolls she had found. It wasn't just a journey into the past, it was an exploration of herself. Every answer brought more questions, and with each piece of the puzzle she uncovered, Elizabeth began to realize that the treasure was not just about discovery, it was about legacy. But legacy came with its own challenges. As her obsession grew, so did the pressure. She could feel the eyes of the past upon her, watching, waiting. But Elizabeth didn't shy away. She had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. The quiet of the mountains had always been comforting, but now, as Elizabeth ventured deeper into the mystery of the treasure, it felt suffocating. Her days had blurred together in a haze of cryptic clues, buried secrets, and unanswered questions. But something had changed, an unsettling feeling that the mountain was responding to her search. It started with small things, a rustle in the trees, a shadow in the distance. And then, one evening, as she sat on her porch, she saw it. A figure, not far from her cabin, standing at the edge of the woods, watching her. Elizabeth's pulse quickened. She had been warned there were others seeking the treasure, and they wouldn't hesitate to take it from her. The next morning, Elizabeth packed her bag, making sure to bring the book and the maps. She had been warned about the trials in the book, the tests of worthiness that would challenge her resolve. She knew it was time to face whatever lay ahead. The figure she had seen wasn't just a shadow, it was a challenge. As she stepped into the forest, the sense of being watched grew stronger. She didn't know what trial awaited her, but she had no choice but to confront it. The treasure wasn't just a physical prize, it was a journey that would test everything she was. Elizabeth moved deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around her as if the very earth was conspiring to test her resolve. The air grew heavier, colder, the forest dense with ancient energy, as if it had absorbed centuries of secrets. Her steps were quiet but deliberate, each footfall taking her closer to whatever awaited her ahead. She had already faced obstacles, cryptic clues, hidden chambers, and strange symbols, but nothing could have prepared her for the confrontation she now sensed, looming in the distance. The figure she had seen the previous evening was gone, but Elizabeth could still feel the presence of someone nearby, a shadow that followed her every movement. It wasn't just a feeling. She knew she was being watched, and she had no choice but to keep moving forward. The treasure, the knowledge, it was all within reach, but it had to be earned. The final trial wasn't going to be handed to her. It was a challenge she would have to face head-on, just as the book had warned. The forest path twisted and turned, and Elizabeth felt as though she were being pulled in different directions, uncertain of the right way. Her mind raced as she recalled the stories Henry had told her, the outlaw, the curse, the trials that tested those brave enough to seek the treasure. What kind of trial would she face? She had expected something physical, perhaps a trap or an obstacle. But as the trees parted ahead of her, she saw something far different. A clearing opened up before her, bathed in sunlight. At the center of the clearing stood a stone pedestal, and on it, a chest, the treasure, she thought, was finally within reach. But as she stepped into the clearing, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the sky above darkened. The clearing became suffused with an eerie silence, broken only by the soft rustling of the trees. Then she saw him, the figure who had been watching her from the shadows. He stepped forward from the edge of the clearing, his face partially obscured by a hood, but his eyes cold, calculating, were fixed on hers. "You're too late," he said, his voice low and smooth. Elizabeth's heart pounded in her chest. This was the man who had been shadowing her, the one who wanted the treasure for himself. He was no mere passerby. He had been seeking it all along, and now, it seemed, he intended to take it from her. The final confrontation had arrived. Elizabeth stood frozen, her heart pounding as the man in the hooded cloak stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The chest at the center of the clearing seemed to beckon them both, a silent invitation to whoever would dare claim it. The air felt thick, charged with tension, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Elizabeth's mind raced. She had come this far, uncovered so much, but now it seemed the final test was not just about finding the treasure, it was about protecting it from someone who would stop at nothing to claim it for himself. "Do you really think you're the only one who's been following these clues?" the man said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "I've been tracking the treasure for years. You're just another pawn in a much larger game." Elizabeth's pulse quickened. He had known about the treasure long before she had stumbled upon it. He had been searching for it, just as Henry had warned. But he wasn't going to let him take it. Not without a fight. "I don't care what you've done," Elizabeth said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside her. "This treasure is more than just gold or jewels. It's about history. It's about knowledge, and I won't let you take it." The man's smirk faded, replaced by an icy stare. "You still don't understand, do you?" he asked. "The treasure isn't just knowledge. It's power, and power is meant to be controlled." As he reached for the chest, Elizabeth's heart raced. She couldn't let him touch it, couldn't let him claim it. But there was something else, a pull, a deep sense that this chest was more than just a physical object. It was a symbol, a key to unlocking something far greater. She could feel its weight, not just in her hands, but in her soul. This was the final trial. Not a battle of physical strength, but of will. Elizabeth stepped forward, placing herself between the man and the chest. "No," she said firmly. "It's not yours to take." A tense silence filled the clearing. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. Then, in one swift motion, the man lunged toward her, his hand reaching for the blonde chest. Without thinking, Elizabeth reached out and touched the stone pedestal, her fingers grazing its surface. The moment her skin made contact, the world around her seemed to shift. A low hum filled the air, and the clearing was bathed in a brilliant light. The man staggered back, shielding his eyes from the blinding glow. Elizabeth gasped as she felt an overwhelming surge of energy rush through her, the chest suddenly pulsing with life. The chamber beneath the pedestal began to open, revealing a hidden underground passage. The treasure wasn't meant to be claimed by one person. It was meant to be shared, understood, and protected. Elizabeth realized then that the true test wasn't about who reached the chest first. It was about knowing the treasure's purpose and being worthy of it. With the man still stumbling in the light, Elizabeth stepped back, taking one last look at the chest before entering the newly revealed passage. The adventure was far from over, but this was only the beginning of what the treasure truly meant. The underground passage was darker than Elizabeth had expected, the air heavy with the scent of earth and time. As she descended deeper, the walls of the tunnel seemed to close in, and the soft hum from the pedestal above faded into silence. Scout, ever loyal, trotted by her side, his steps echoing in the narrow space. Every movement, every breath, seemed amplified in the quiet, as if the cave itself were listening. The passage stretched for what felt like miles, and Elizabeth found herself wondering how long the treasure had been hidden here, how many others had come before her, only to turn back when the path grew too difficult. She had no intention of turning back, not now, not when she was so close. But the further she walked, the more the weight of history settled on her shoulders. The legend had come alive before her eyes, and now it was clear that the treasure wasn't just about wealth. It was about something much bigger, something lost to time, buried deep beneath the mountain. Eventually, the passage opened up into a vast underground chamber, unlike anything Elizabeth had seen before. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, etched into the stone with such precision that they almost seemed to shimmer in the dim light from her flashlight. The symbols on the walls were familiar. They mirrored those she had found on the jewelry, the map, the stone. But these were different. They were more intricate, more detailed. It was as if the story was unfolding before her, layer by layer. In the center of the chamber stood a large stone pedestal, much like the one above ground. But this time, there was no chest. Instead, a massive stone slab rested on the pedestal, inscribed with more symbols and a single word, written in a language Elizabeth couldn't understand. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out instinctively, but something stopped her. A feeling, a warning. The slab seemed to pulse with, quote, energy, as if it were waiting for something, waiting for her to understand its meaning. As she studied it, the faintest whisper brushed against her mind, a voice not from the past, but from within herself. She had been here before, in a way. The symbols on the walls, the carvings, even the stone slab, they weren't just clues. They were memories, fragments of a life she hadn't lived, but was somehow a part of. The weight of it all hit her at once. The treasure wasn't just about uncovering a lost civilization. It was about uncovering herself. Her hands trembled as she traced the carvings on the slab, trying to make sense of the symbols. They were ancient, yes, but they felt oddly familiar, as though they were calling her name. And then, with a sharp intake of breath, she saw at a symbol she recognized, one she had seen before on the jewelry, on the map, on the stone. It was the key, the missing piece to the puzzle. With newfound clarity, Elizabeth knew what she had to do. She reached into her bag, pulled out the key she had found in the barn, and held it up to the slab. As she did, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the stone began to shift. Slowly, with a low groan, the slab began to rise, revealing what had been hidden for centuries. The chamber grew colder as the stone slab moved, revealing a hidden alcove beneath. Elizabeth's heart raced as the last layer of the mystery began to peel away, and the long-buried secret came into view. The soft light from her flashlight flickered against the walls of the chamber, casting eerie shadows across the floor. She stepped forward cautiously, her mind reeling from the gravity of what she was about to discover. In the alcove lay an intricate, ancient artifact, a large, ornate chest, its surface covered in symbols that matched those she had seen on the stone slab. The chest was carved from a stone, unlike any Elizabeth had encountered before, a rich, dark material that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. As she approached, she could feel the air grow denser, heavier with each step. The treasure was here, but something about it felt different. This was no ordinary chest, no simple reward. This was the culmination of everything she had learned, everything she had uncovered. Elizabeth knelt before the chest, her hands trembling as she reached for the lid. Her mind raced through the trials she had faced, physical and mental obstacles, cryptic clues, shadowy figures, all leading her to this moment. But now, standing before the chest, she understood that the real test was yet to come. The treasure wasn't just about wealth or artifacts, it was about wisdom, knowledge, and responsibility. The outlaw's curse wasn't just a myth, it was a warning. With one deep breath, Elizabeth lifted the chest's lid. Inside, instead of gold or jewels, she found a collection of ancient scrolls, each one carefully preserved in cloth. The scrolls were covered in the same symbols she had. encountered throughout her journey. But there was something else. One scroll in particular stood out. It was thicker than the others, its edges frayed with age, its surface nearly worn away from time. It contained a message, a story written in a language long forgotten. Elizabeth's fingers hovered over the scroll. She had come so far, faced so many challenges, but the real test was now. Could she unlock the true meaning of this treasure? Could she understand the legacy that had been left behind? Her heart pounded in her chest as she carefully unrolled the ancient parchment. As the words came into focus, Elizabeth realized that this was not just a message. It was a guide, a map, not to a physical treasure, but to something far greater. The knowledge contained in these scrolls held the key to understanding the lost civilization, its culture, its wisdom. And now, it was her responsibility to ensure that this knowledge would not be lost again. The final test was not about claiming the treasure, it was about protecting it, sharing it with the world. And in that moment, Elizabeth understood her purpose. She had found what she had been searching for, but the journey was far from over. This was only the beginning. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the underground chamber, the ancient scrolls resting heavy in her hands. The cavernous room felt different now, as though the earth itself had shifted in response to her discovery. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the responsibility of what she had unearthed becoming clearer by the second. This treasure, this knowledge, it wasn't just hers to keep. She had been entrusted with it, but the true cost of her discovery had yet to reveal itself. The chest, once thought to be the treasure, now seemed insignificant compared to the power within those scrolls. Elizabeth could see the intricate maps, the lost languages, the knowledge of a civilization that had once thrived here, hidden away for centuries. It was more than wealth, it was wisdom that could change the course of history. Yet, as she began to feel the weight of it all, she understood that sharing this knowledge wouldn't be simple. The journey had never been about treasure in the traditional sense. It had always been about uncovering something deeper, something beyond physical riches. But now, Elizabeth was faced with a moral dilemma. How would she share this knowledge? Would the world be ready for the truth, or would it destroy everything in its wake? The outlaw's curse had always been about more than treasure. It had been about keeping this knowledge from the wrong hands. And now, those hands were closer than ever. She thought about the man who had followed her, the one who had shadowed her every step. She knew he would stop at nothing to claim the treasure for himself, to use the knowledge contained in those scrolls for his own gain. The price of discovery wasn't just the effort it took to uncover the truth, it was the danger of what came after. Elizabeth couldn't let that happen. The treasure wasn't just for the taking. It had to be protected, safeguarded, even if it meant making sacrifices along the way. But the question remained. Was she willing to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders for the greater good? Elizabeth left the cave at dawn, the first light of morning painting the mountain peaks with soft hues of gold and pink. The scrolls, carefully packed and secured in her bag, weighed heavily on her mind. She had spent the night in the cave, reflecting on everything she had discovered, and the decisions that lay ahead. The treasure was not just the knowledge contained within the scrolls, but the responsibility to protect it, an unspoken burden she would carry for the rest of her life. As she made her way back toward her cabin, the path seemed more familiar, yet the world around her felt changed. She had gone into the mountains searching for peace, for a way to escape the noise, tum of the world. Instead, she had found herself at the center of something far more complex, a story that had been buried for centuries, a treasure that could alter the course of history. But now, as she looked around at the quiet landscape, she understood that peace wasn't something to be found by escaping it. It was something to be created, something to be fought for. She thought about the choices she would have to make. She could go to the authorities, share the knowledge with historians and scholars, but she knew the world wasn't ready for what she had uncovered. There were people who would exploit it, people who would use it to fuel their own agendas. It wasn't about hiding the truth, it was about making sure it was shared responsibly, with those who would use it wisely. Elizabeth had come to understand that her discovery wasn't an end. It was a new beginning. The treasure wasn't just for one person. It was meant to be a legacy, a gift to future generations. She couldn't let it be misused or forgotten. As she stood at the edge of her cabin, looking out over the mountains, she made a decision. She would protect the knowledge, preserve the story, and share it in time. The world would know the truth when it was ready. And so, with a deep breath, Elizabeth walked into a new chapter of her life. The treasure had been found. But the real journey was just beginning. The world had changed, and she would be the one to ensure it was changed for the better. With the scrolls safely hidden away, she knew her purpose now: to safeguard the legacy of the lost civilization, to honor their memory, and to protect the knowledge that had been entrusted to her.